The emergency klaxons screamed through Medical Bay 7 like banshees, their piercing wail cutting through the usual hum of life support systems and diagnostic equipment. Jake Morrison's hands never paused in their work, even as the lights shifted to emergency red and the station shuddered beneath his feet. He'd been a combat medic for 8 years first in the Outer Rim conflicts, then aboard the medical frigate Sanctuary, and he'd learned long ago that wounded soldiers didn't care about alarms. "Corporal." "Hold still," Jake muttered, threading a biosuture through the gaping plasma burn across Private Chun's shoulder. The young soldier gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as the synthetic tissue began knitting itself to his damaged flesh. Almost done. The station shook again, harder this time, and Jake heard the distinctive groan of metal under stress. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see debris tumbling past and avoid twisted chunks of hull plating and sparking electronics that glowed like dying stars against the black. "Doc, we've got incoming." Nurse Valdez burst through the medical bay doors, her usually pristine uniform splattered with coolant fluid. "Unknown vessel just crashed into Docking Bay 3. Captain's calling for all available medical personnel." Jake sealed the biosuture and helped Chun sit up. "You'll live, soldier. Keep that dressing dry for 48 hours. He was already moving toward the emergency kit locker, muscle memory guiding his hands to the trauma supplies he'd need. "Valdez, prep the emergency surgical suite. If someone survived that impact, they're going to need immediate intervention." The corridors of Station Kepler 7 were chaos. Emergency crews rushed past carrying fire suppression equipment, while security teams jogged toward the docking bays with weapons drawn. Jake pushed through the crowd, his medical kit slung over his shoulder and a portable life support unit floating behind him on repulsors. Docking Bay 3 looked like a war zone. The unknown ship, if it could still be called, that had punched through the bay's atmospheric barrier and embedded itself halfway into the far bulkhead. The vessel's hull was unlike anything Jake had seen before. Sleek black metal that seemed to absorb light, covered in intricate patterns that might have been decorative or functional. Coolant and atmosphere leaked from a dozen ruptures, creating an eerie fog that drifted across the deck. "Jesus," breathed Lieutenant Torres, the security chief. "What the hell is that thing?" Jake was already scanning the wreckage with his medical tricorder. "I'm reading one life sign, very faint. We need to get in there now." "Doc, that could be a trap." "We don't know what. I don't care if it's the devil himself," Jake snapped, pulling on his emergency respirator. "Someone's dying in there, and I took an oath." The ship's interior was a maze of twisted metal and sparking conduits. Jake crawled through a breach in the hull, following his tricorder's readings deeper into the vessel. The life sign was getting weaker with each passing second. Whoever was in here wouldn't last much longer. He found her in what might have been the cockpit, though the crash had turned it into an abstract sculpture of destruction. She was pinned beneath a collapsed support beam, her body motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was Zephyrian, he could tell from the elongated limbs and the distinctive ridge of bone along her skull. But where most Zephyrians were pale as moonlight, her skin was a deep charcoal gray, and it was covered in the most extraordinary tattoos Jake had ever seen. Bioluminescent ink traced intricate patterns across her arms, neck and face, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat like a living constellation. The designs were beautiful and alien. Flowing script in languages he didn't recognize, interwoven with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Torres, I need a cutting torch in here." Jake called out, already working to stabilize her vitals. Her pulse was thready and irregular, and his scanner showed massive internal bleeding. "And get me a trauma team now." It took 20 minutes to extract her from the wreckage. 20 minutes during which Jake watched her life signs fluctuate wildly. Zephyrian physiology was different from human. Their hearts had 3 chambers instead of 4, and their blood carried oxygen through crystalline structures rather than iron-based hemoglobin. But trauma was trauma, and Jake had treated enough alien species to know the basics. They rushed her to the emergency surgical suite, where Jake worked frantically to repair the damage. Her left lung had collapsed, 3 ribs were shattered, and there was significant bleeding in her abdominal cavity. But it was her neural readings that worried him most. The patterns were chaotic, unlike anything he'd seen before. "Her brain activity is all over the place," Valdez observed, monitoring the displays. "It's like her neural pathways are scrambled." Jake sealed another internal rupture and moved to the next. Zephyrians have redundant neural networks. Maybe the trauma triggered some kind of protective shutdown. For 6 hours, Jake fought to save her life. He repaired organs, mended bones, and stabilized her vital signs, all while the strange tattoos on her skin continued their hypnotic pulsing. Several times her heart stopped entirely, and Jake had to use the neural stimulator to restart it, a procedure that should have been impossible on a Zephyrian, whose nervous system was supposedly incompatible with human medical technology. But somehow, it worked. As dawn broke over the station's artificial horizon, her vital signs finally stabilized. Jake slumped against the surgical table, exhausted but victorious. She would live. It was 3 days before she woke up. Jake was reviewing her charts when her eyes opened, large, silver orbs that seemed to hold depths of starlight. She blinked slowly, confusion evident in her alien features, and tried to speak. Only a whisper emerged. "Easy," Jake said, moving to her bedside. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. You were in a crash, do you remember?" She stared at him with those luminous eyes, her lips moving soundlessly. Then, with tremendous effort, she managed to speak a single word: "Jake." He froze. "What did you say?" Her hand moved weakly, and Jake saw her looking down at her palm. Following her gaze, he noticed something he'd missed during the surgery. There, written in the same bioluminescent ink as her other tattoos, but in perfect human script, was his name, Jake Morrison. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She tried to sit up, panic flickering across her features. I don't." Her voice was melodic despite its weakness, with the characteristic harmonic undertones of Zephyrian speech. "I don't remember. I don't remember anything." Jake's medical scanner confirmed what her behavior suggested: massive neural trauma, consistent with severe memory loss. But that should have been impossible. Zephyrians had perfect recall, their memories stored in crystalline matrices that were virtually indestructible. Amnesia simply didn't happen to their species. "What's your name?" Jake asked gently. She stared at him with growing desperation, her tattoos pulsing faster as her heart rate increased. "I don't know. I don't know who I am, where I came from, why I'm here." Her silver eyes fixed on the tattoo of his name. "This is all I have. You're all I have." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Somehow, this mysterious Zephyrian woman knew. His name had it permanently inscribed on her body, but he had never seen her before in his life. And now she was looking at him like he held the key to her very existence. Outside the medical bay, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the mystery that had just begun to unfold. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Jake was running a neural scan on his mysterious patient when the medical bay doors hissed open with unusual force. 3 figures strode in wearing the distinctive midnight blue uniforms of galactic intelligence, the kind of people who asked questions first and worried about answers later. "Dr. Morrison?" The lead agent was human, tall and sharp-featured with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Agent Reeves, GI. We need to speak with you about your patient." Jake didn't look up from his scanner. "She's in critical condition. Whatever questions you have can wait. I'm afraid they can't." Reeves moved closer, and Jake noticed the other 2 agents, a Centauran and what looked like a modified human with cybernetic implants had positioned themselves near the exits. "We've identified your patient's ship. It's Zephyrian military, classified stealth design. The kind they use for special operations." The woman on the biobed stirred at the sound of voices. Over the past day, Jake had been calling her Silver because of her eyes, and she'd seemed to accept the temporary name. Now those same eyes tracked the agents with an alertness that seemed at odds with her claimed amnesia. Special operations? Jake finally looked up. "She's a refugee, not a soldier. Look at her. She barely survived the crash." Agent Reeves consulted a data pad. "Dr. Morrison, are you familiar with the designation Wraith-class operative?" Jake's blood went cold. Everyone in the military knew about Wraith-class Ephraim assassins, so deadly that entire star systems had surrendered rather than face them. They were ghosts, legends. The monsters' parents used to frighten children into behaving. "That's impossible," Jake said, but even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering things. The way Silver moved when she thought he wasn't watching, fluid, predatory, like a dancer who'd learned to kill. How she'd instinctively flinched away from the medical restraints, not out of fear, but as if her body knew how to escape them. The strange scars he'd found during surgery, precise marks that suggested surgical modification rather than injury. "We've run her biosignatures through our database," Reeves continued. "Your patient is Zarathus Velinari, known in intelligence circles as the Wraith. She's personally responsible for the deaths of over 300 humans across 17 star systems." Silver Zara was sitting up now, her face pale but her posture unnaturally straight. "I don't remember any of that," she said quietly. "Convenient," the Centauran agent spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. "Memory loss is impossible for Zephyrians. Their neural matrices don't work that way." Jake stepped between the agents and his patient. "Even if that's true, she's under my medical care. You can't just—" The station's emergency klaxons cut him off, but these weren't the standard alert tones. These were the deep, bone-shaking wails that meant only one thing: incoming hostile vessels. "All hands to battle stations," Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the comm system. "We have multiple Zephyrian warships dropping out of hyperspace. This is not a drill." Agent Reeves smiled grimly. "Looks like her friends have come calling." Through the medical bay's viewport, Jake could see the sleek, predatory shapes of Zephyrian destroyers materializing against the stars. Their hulls were the same light-absorbing black as the crashed ship, and they moved with the fluid grace of hunting sharks. "Attention Station Kepler 7, a voice crackled over the communications array, speaking in accented but perfect standard. "You are harboring a traitor to the Zephyrian hegemony. Surrender the one called Zarathus Velinari, and your station will be spared." Jake looked at Silver at Zara and saw something flicker in her silver eyes. Not memory, exactly, but recognition. Like hearing a half-remembered song from childhood. "I won't let them take you," he said. She stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Why? If what they say is true, if I really am this Wraith, why would you protect me?" Before Jake could answer, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red, but in that moment of darkness, Zara had moved. Jake blinked, and she was no longer on the biobed. She was standing by the door, her body coiled like a spring. The medical restraints lay on the floor, not torn or broken, but somehow unlocked with surgical precision. "How did you?" Agent Reeves began, reaching for his weapon. He never finished the sentence. Zara moved like liquid shadow, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Her hand struck his wrist with mechanical precision, and his sidearm clattered to the floor. Before the other agents could react, she had Reeves in a chokehold. Her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. "Nobody move," she said calmly. And Jake heard something new in her voice: authority command. The tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The Centauran agent raised his weapon. "Let him go, Wraith." "My name," Zara said, tightening her grip on Reeves, "is not Wraith." Jake watched in fascination and horror as muscle memory took over. This wasn't the confused, vulnerable woman he'd been treating. This was something else entirely. A predator wearing a patient's face. The station shuddered as the Zephyrian ships opened fire, but their weapons weren't aimed at the hull. They were targeting the docking bays, the communication arrays, the escape pods. They weren't trying to destroy the station. They were trying to trap everyone inside. "They're not here to rescue me," Zara said, and Jake heard surprise in her voice. "They're here to kill me." "And everyone else, apparently," the cybernetic agent added, checking his scanner. "They're jamming all communications and blocking the escape routes." Zara released Agent Reeves and stepped back, her hands raised. "I remember fragments," she said slowly. "Not everything, but enough. I was supposed to die in that crash." "The ship was sabotaged. By who?" Jake asked. "By me." Her silver eyes met his. "I sabotaged my own ship rather than complete my final mission." The medical bay's blast doors suddenly sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Through the comm system, they could hear Captain Morrison's voice. "All sections. We have Zephyrian boarding parties in the lower decks. Security teams to defensive positions." Agent Reeves rubbed his throat and glared at Zara. "What was your final mission?" She was quiet for a long moment, her tattoos pulsing in complex patterns, as if responding to her emotional state. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I was sent to assassinate the medical staff of this station, starting with Dr. Jake Morrison." Jake felt the world tilt around him. "What? You saved 17 Zephyrian prisoners during the Battle of Proxima Station." Zara continued, her words coming faster now as memories surfaced. "You treated them the same as human casualties, gave them the same care, the same respect. The hegemony considered this problematic. They wanted to send a message about human compassion being a weakness." The sound of weapons fire echoed through the station's corridors, growing closer. "But you couldn't do it," Jake said. Understanding beginning to dawn, Zara's tattoos flared brighter. And for the first time since she'd awakened, she smiled a sad, beautiful expression that transformed her alien features. "I watched you work for 3 days before I was supposed to kill you. I saw you save lives without asking about species or allegiance. I saw you cry when you lost a patient, even though he was your enemy." She touched the tattoo of his name on her palm. "I realized I didn't want to be a weapon anymore. I wanted to be like you." The blast doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoking ruins of the blast doors came death itself. The Zephyrian strike team moved like liquid darkness, their bioluminescent tattoos creating shifting patterns of light and shadow as they flowed into the medical bay. Unlike Zara's intricate, almost artistic markings, theirs were stark and geometric. The cold efficiency of weapons made Flesh. Jake counted 6 of them, each one tall and predatory, their movements synchronized with inhuman precision. They wore no armor, needed none. Their bodies were weapons, enhanced and modified until they were barely recognizable as the same species as the woman standing beside him. "Zarathus Velinari," the lead assassin spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that made Jake's teeth ache. "You have brought shame upon the hegemony. Your death will restore balance." Zara stepped forward, placing herself between Jake and the strike team. Her posture had changed, completely gone was any trace of the confused patient. This was the Wraith, and Jake could finally see why that name had become legend. "My name," she said, her tattoos blazing with silver fire, "is Zara. And if you want him, you'll have to go through me." The lead assassin tilted his head, studying her with predatory interest. "You would die for this human? This soft, weak creature who patches wounds instead of making them?" "Yes," Zara said simply. "I would." What happened next defied human comprehension. The assassins moved as one, flowing across the medical bay like a tide of death. But Zara was already in motion, her body remembering skills her mind had tried to forget. She caught the first attacker's strike and redirected it into the second, used the third's momentum to send him crashing into the medical equipment. Her movements were poetry written in violence, each gesture flowing seamlessly into the next. Jake pressed himself against the wall, watching in awe and terror as the woman he'd saved fought for his life. Agent Reeves and his team had taken cover behind an overturned biobed, their weapons useless in the chaotic melee, but there were too many of them. And they were fresh while Zara was still recovering from her injuries. A blade found her shoulder, spinning her around. Another caught her across the ribs, painting her silver tattoos with darker silver blood. Zara! Jake started forward, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Stay back," she gasped, dodging another strike. "This is what I was made for." The lead assassin smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. "You were made to serve the hegemony. Instead, you chose to serve weakness." "I chose to serve something better," Zara replied, and Jake saw her tattoos shift, the patterns rearranging themselves into new configurations. "I chose to serve hope." She moved differently now, not like a killer but like a protector. Where before her strikes had been meant to end lives, now they were calculated to disable, to defend. She wasn't trying to destroy her attackers, she was trying to save everyone in the room, including them. It was a losing battle. For every assassin she disabled, another took their place. Her movements were slowing, her breathing labored. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll. That's when Jake made his choice. He grabbed the neural stimulator from the emergency kit, the same device he'd used to restart Zara's heart during surgery. Zephyrian nervous systems were supposedly incompatible with human medical technology, but he'd made it work before. "Zara, duck." She dropped without hesitation, trusting him completely. Jake activated the stimulator and aimed it at the lead assassin. The device discharged with a crackling blue arc, and the Zephyrian convulsed as foreign electrical patterns flooded his neural pathways. But instead of simply stunning him, something unexpected happened. The assassin's tattoos began to flicker and change, their rigid geometric patterns softening into something more organic. His eyes, which had been cold and empty, suddenly filled with confusion and what looked like fear. "What did you do to me?" he whispered, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Jake understood with sudden clarity. "The tattoos aren't just decorative. They're neural programming, aren't they? Behavioral modification encoded directly into your nervous system." Zara pulled herself to her feet, her silver eyes wide with realization. The hegemony doesn't just train assassins. They create them. They take children and rewrite their minds, turn them into living weapons. The other assassins had stopped fighting, staring at their leader with growing alarm. His tattoos continued to shift and change, and with each transformation, more humanity seemed to return to his features. "I remember," he said, his voice breaking. "I remember my name. My real name. I was just a child when they took me." Agent Reeves emerged from cover, his weapon trained on the confused assassins. "This is impossible. Zephyrian neural programming is supposed to be irreversible." "Human medical technology works differently," Jake said, understanding flooding through him. "Our neural stimulators don't just affect the nervous system, they disrupt artificial patterns, restore natural brain function. That's why it worked on Zara when she flatlined." Zara looked down at her own tattoos, which were still shifting and changing. "You didn't just save my life in that surgery. You freed my mind." The station shuddered again as more Zephyrian ships arrived, but these were different, larger, more heavily armed. Through the viewport, Jake could see the distinctive profile of a hegemony dreadnought, its weapons charging with ominous light. "They're going to destroy the station," Agent Reeves said grimly. They can't risk word of this getting out. But Zara was already moving, her fingers dancing across the medical bay's communication console. Not if I can help it. What are you doing? Broadcasting on all Zephyrian military frequencies, she said, her tattoos now pulsing in rapid, complex patterns. Telling them what I've learned. What we've all learned. Jake watched as she transmitted not just words, but the bioluminescent patterns of her tattoos themselves, a visual language that spoke directly to the Zephyrian nervous system. She was showing them the truth, that their perfect assassins were stolen children. Their loyal soldiers were mind-controlled slaves. The effect was immediate. Across the Zephyrian fleet, tattoos began to change. Rigid patterns softened into organic curves. Cold, empty eyes filled with confusion, then recognition, then rage not at the humans, but at their own leaders who had stolen their lives. The Dreadnought's weapons powered down. One by one, the Zephyrian ships began to withdraw. Their crews no longer willing to follow orders they finally understood were not their own. In the medical bay, the former assassins sat in stunned silence, staring at hands that were no longer weapons, remembering names they thought they'd lost forever. What happens now? Jake asked. Zara turned to him, her silver eyes bright with tears and hope. Now we heal, she said. All of us. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we can help others remember who they really are. She touched the tattoo of his name on her palm. But now Jake could see it was changing too. The rigid script flowing into something more personal, more alive. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me that the strongest thing in the universe isn't the ability to take life. It's the courage to save it. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, but for the first time in generations, they looked down on a galaxy where freedom had a chance to grow, and in a small medical bay on a forgotten station, a human doctor and a former assassin began the long work of healing a wounded universe, one life at a time.